What if I told you that the fall of the Roman Republic didn't begin with Caesar, but with two brothers, two men who believed they could heal Rome, and paid for it with their lives? A century before Julius Caesar ever crossed the Rubicon, Rome was already bleeding from within. The empire was expanding, wealth was pouring in, but ordinary Romans, the soldiers who built that empire, were losing everything. Farmland was seized by the rich, and veterans returning from war found their lands gone, replaced by vast estates owned by senators. Into this world stepped Tiberius Gracchus, a young nobleman with a conscience sharper than any sword. Born into one of Rome's most respected families, he could have lived in luxury. Instead, he chose justice. As tribune of the people, Tiberius proposed a daring reform: to take public land that had been illegally seized by the wealthy and give it back to the poor citizens of Rome. It was a plan meant to save the Republic, but to the Senate it was an act of war. Tiberius was accused of tyranny, of trying to make himself king. And on a chaotic day in 133 BC, senators and their followers stormed the Capitol. Armed with clubs and broken chairs, they beat Tiberius Gracchus to death. The first blood spilled in Roman politics. But the story didn't end there. 10 years later, his younger brother Gaius Gracchus stepped forward to finish what Tiberius had begun. Smarter, more fiery, and just as idealistic, Gaius expanded his brother's vision, creating grain laws to feed the poor, reforms to empower citizens, and policies to hold the Senate accountable. For a moment, it seemed that the Gracchi dream might live. But once again, the old power struck back. The Senate branded Gaius a traitor. Surrounded by soldiers and betrayal, Gaius chose death over capture, ending his life before they could take it from him. The Gracchus brothers were gone, but Rome would never be the same. Their courage exposed the truth: that the Republic was no longer ruled by virtue, but by violence and greed. And from their blood, the long shadow of civil war began to rise. Because sometimes, the fall of a republic begins not with an emperor, but with two brothers who dared to save it.
This is the story of a single man who stole the arrows of an entire army of 800,000 men, and turned the tide of a nation's fate. His name was Zhuge Liang, the brilliant mind behind Liu Bei's rise, a man whose intellect became as feared as any weapon in the Age of the Three Kingdoms. Born during chaos, Zhuge Liang was not a warrior, but a strategist whose wisdom could outmatch 10,000 swords. When Liu Bei sought his counsel, he found him living quietly in the countryside, farming and reading. But when the two finally met, it was as if destiny itself took a breath, for from that moment, Liu Bei's dream of restoring the Han dynasty found its guiding star. Zhuge Liang's genius was unmatched. He could foresee enemy movements, predict the weather, and manipulate morale like the strings of a zither. But one story forever sealed his legend: the day he stole 100,000 arrows from the enemy without spilling a drop of blood. Facing a dire shortage of ammunition before battle, Zhuge Liang promised to deliver 100,000 arrows within 3 days. His peers mocked him, thinking it impossible. But on the third night, under a thick fog, he sent boats covered with straw figures drifting toward the enemy camp. As the fog hit his troops, the enemy, believing an attack was coming, unleashed a storm of arrows. By dawn, the straw men were bristling with countless shafts. Zhuge Liang smiled, ordered the boats turned around, and brought back enough arrows to arm his entire army. When Liu Bei saw this, he knew he wasn't merely following a strategist, he was following a man who could bend fate itself. Through countless campaigns, Zhuge Liang guided Liu Bei with patience and vision, striving always for unity and justice amid endless war. Even after Liu Bei's death, Zhuge Liang continued to serve his son with unwavering loyalty, carrying the burden of a dream he did not live to see fulfilled. And so, history remembers him not for his power, but for his mind, a man who fought wars with wisdom instead of rage, and whose quiet brilliance echoed louder than any battlefield's roar.
Imagine a ruler so feared that even speaking honestly in his presence could cost you your life. Such was the reign of Yi Sangin, the most notorious tyrant of the Joseon dynasty. Born a prince shaped by trauma and paranoia, he rose to power already carrying a deep resentment over the tragic death of his mother. Once he became king, that resentment grew into a relentless cruelty that consumed the nation. Yin Sangin turned his court into a chamber of terror. He ordered sweeping purges of scholars, silencing anyone who dared criticize him. Entire families were executed under accusations of treason. His wrath extended even into the royal palace, where he humiliated queens and consorts, and lashed out with violence against those he believed had wronged him. The king's appetite for control became so extreme that the palace became a place where whispers could kill. As his tyranny intensified, so did the desperation of his court. Ministers who had once feared his anger began to fear the destruction of the entire kingdom if he remained in power. In 1506, they risked everything. A coalition of high-ranking officials launched a coup, seizing the palace before Yin Sangin could react. Stripped of his throne, he was exiled, no longer a king, but a man defeated by his own brutality. Within weeks, the once terrifying ruler died far from the power he had abused, remembered not for achievements, but for the terror that ended his reign. His fall remains one of Korea's starkest reminders that absolute power, when driven by fear and vengeance, can destroy both a nation and its king.
Marcus Licinius Crassus, the richest man in Rome, dreamed of matching Caesar's glory and Pompey's fame. In 53 BCE, he set his eyes eastward toward the Parthian Empire, a land of silk, archers, and desert kings. Crassus sought conquest, but what awaited him was disaster. Marching with 7 legions across the sands of Mesopotamia, he ignored the advice of allies who warned him not to face the Parthians in open terrain. The Parthian general Shurna was waiting, not with legions, but with cavalry. Thousands of horse archers rode in shimmering armor, their bows raining arrows from every direction. At Carrhae, the Roman squares collapsed under endless volleys. The Parthians used the deadly Parthian shot, firing backward while retreating, a tactic Rome had never faced. Roman shields became coffins, and the desert echoed with screams of dying soldiers. Crassus watched his army crumble, betrayed by his own arrogance. Shurna offered him peace talks, but it was a trap. Crassus was killed, his head taken to the Parthian king as a trophy. Rome's pride was shattered in the sands of the east. Nearly 20,000 Romans were slain, and 10,000 more enslaved, a humiliation that burned in Roman memory for generations. Crassus had chased eternal glory, but found only eternal shame.
They said a man born in poverty could never touch the heavens, but Liu Bei proved them wrong. From selling straw sandals on the streets to founding a kingdom that rivaled empires, his life became one of China's most enduring legends. Born in 161 AD, during the fading years of the Han dynasty, Liu Bei was a distant descendant of imperial blood, yet he had nothing but a will of iron. China was collapsing into chaos, warlords tearing the land apart, the Han authority crumbling. In this storm, Liu Bei dreamed not of wealth, but of restoring the empire's lost glory. Fate brought him 2 brothers not by blood, but by spirit, Guan Yu, the fierce warrior with unmatched loyalty, and Zhang Fei, the bold and fiery general. In a humble peach garden, the 3 men swore an oath, to live and die together, to serve the Han dynasty, and to protect the innocent. That oath became one of the most powerful symbols of brotherhood in Chinese history. Together, they fought countless battles, often against impossible odds. Liu Bei was not the strongest nor the richest, but his compassion drew people to him. Soldiers followed him not out of fear, but devotion. He endured betrayal, defeat, and exile, yet never abandoned his dream of a just and moral rule. In time, his perseverance was rewarded. With the guidance of the brilliant strategist Zhuge Liang, Liu Bei founded the kingdom of Shu Han, claiming to continue the legacy of the fallen Han Empire. His reign was short, and his life ended in 223 AD, but his spirit outlived dynasties. Liu Bei's story became legend, a tale of loyalty, resilience, and brotherhood that defined the meaning of honor for centuries to come.
Imagine a warrior so powerful that entire armies froze at the mention of his name. Yet so untrustworthy that even his allies slept with a hand on their sword. This is the story of Liu Bu, the most fearsome fighter of the late Han dynasty, and the most infamous traitor of his age. Liu Bu was the kind of warrior legends are built around. He rode the red hare, a horse said to run 1,000 miles in a day, and on the battlefield he moved like a storm. When Lu Bu charged, commanders panicked. When he dueled, opponents died. Strength, speed, mastery of weapons, no one matched him. In an era filled with heroes like Guan Yu and Zhang Fei, Lu Bu stood alone at the very top. But behind all that glory was a dark truth. Lu Bu could never be trusted. His story begins with his first great betrayal. Ding Yuan, the man who raised him like a son, trusted him with command, but tempted by gold, a new horse, and the ambitions of warlord Dong Zhuo, Lu Bu killed his adoptive father with his own hands. Dong Zhuo, thinking he had gained a loyal champion, adopted Lu Bu as well. He protected him, rewarded him, treated him like family, and then, betrayal struck again. Convinced by court officials that Dong Zhuo was too dangerous, Lu Bu turned on his second father figure and stabbed him to death. From that moment, his name became a warning. Lu Bu fights like a god, but betrays like a devil. After Dong Zhuo's fall, Lu Bu drifted from warlord to warlord, Yuan Shu, Liu Bei, anyone who could give him shelter or power, but when times got tough, he abandoned them too. His ambition was massive, but his loyalty was zero. In the end, even his unparalleled skill couldn't save him. Captured by Cao Cao, Lu Bu begged for one last chance. Offering to serve faithfully, Cao Cao hesitated. Until Liu Bei whispered a simple reminder, "My lord, don't forget how he treated his past masters." And with that, Lu Bu, the strongest warrior of his age, was executed, a life defined by unmatched power. And destroyed by endless betrayal, Lu Bu remains a legend, the perfect warrior, and the perfect warning, no matter how strong you are. No one survives alone when they cannot be trusted.
Imagine a ruler so ambitious he tried to erase the past, and so paranoid he hunted for immortality. A man who built China's foundations, and buried thousands beneath them. This is the story of Qin Shi Huang, the first emperor of China, a leader both feared and legendary. Qin Shi Huang wasn't born a godlike emperor, he began as a young king of the small Qin state during China's chaotic warring states period. But from the moment he rose to power, he had one goal: unify the fractured lands under one iron rule. By the age of 38, he achieved the impossible, defeating every rival kingdom and declaring himself Shi Huangdi, the first emperor of a united China. His reforms were revolutionary. He standardized writing, currency, weights, and even the width of wagon wheels so roads would be efficient across his empire. He ordered massive construction projects, including the early foundations of the Great Wall. For the first time, the idea of China became something real and unified, and that legacy has lasted over 2,000 years. But his greatness came with darkness. Qin Shi Huang ruled with a philosophy of strict control. Critics were silenced, sometimes executed. Books he considered dangerous were burned. Scholars who opposed him vanished. His quest for immortality drove him to send expeditions searching for magical elixirs, while he himself consumed dangerous medicines that slowly poisoned him. And then there's his tomb, a gigantic underground empire guarded by the Terracotta Army, thousands of life-sized soldiers crafted to protect him in the afterlife. It's one of the most extraordinary, and eerie, monuments any ruler has ever built. So why is he so controversial? Because Qin Shi Huang created the foundations of a nation, but did it through absolute power, harsh laws, and fear. To some, he's the architect of China. To others, he's a tyrant who paid for unity with human lives. One thing is certain, the first emperor didn't just shape a country, he shaped history.
March 15, 44 BC. The Ides of March. The air inside the theater of Pompey is thick. Not with applause, but with whispers. Senators crowd around Julius Caesar, smiling too widely, their togas hiding blades. Then a sudden flash of metal. One strike, then another, and another. The man who conquered Gaul, who crossed the Rubicon, who defied the gods of Rome, falls beneath the weight of his own senate. But why did Rome's greatest general die at the hands of those he once called friends? To understand that, we need to step into the mind of the Republic. For centuries, Rome had been ruled not by kings, but by laws, by the Senate. Caesar had changed that balance. His victories made him untouchable. His popularity with the people turned him into something Rome feared most, a ruler who could rise above the Republic itself. The Senate watched in silence as Caesar took power after power. Consul, dictator, and finally dictator for life. To some, he was a hero who ended civil wars and restored order. But to others, especially the old guard like Brutus and Cassius, he was the death of liberty itself. They feared what came next. Would Caesar crown himself king? Would the Senate become nothing more than decoration? For men like Brutus, whose ancestor had once overthrown Rome's last monarch, this was unthinkable. They convinced themselves they were saving Rome, not betraying it. So on that day when Caesar walked into the Senate, they didn't see a man. They saw a threat, the shadow of monarchy rising again. And when the first knife struck, it wasn't just against Caesar. It was against everything he represented, absolute power. But as the blood stained the marble floor, the conspirators realized too late. The republic they tried to save would die anyway. Rome would mourn Caesar, not them. And from his death would rise not freedom but an empire.
In a world where women were rarely seen on the battlefield, one ruled the seas with iron resolve. Her name was Artemisia of Caria, the first female admiral in recorded history, who earned even the respect of Xerxes, the king of kings. Born in Halicarnassus, a Greek city under Persian control, Artemisia defied every expectation of her time. When others saw a woman's place in the palace, she saw it on the deck of a warship. She commanded her own fleet during the great Persian invasion of Greece, not as a token, but as one of Xerxes' most trusted strategists. At the Battle of Salamis, while the Persian navy crumbled under Greek tactics, Artemisia stood out. Surrounded by enemies, she pulled a daring trick, ramming one of her own allied ships to make the Greeks think she had switched sides. The Greeks let her escape, and Xerxes, watching from afar, believed she had sunk an enemy vessel. He famously exclaimed, "My men have become women, and my women men."
In a time of chaos, when the Han dynasty was crumbling and warlords fought for power, one man rose from the shadows, Cao Cao. Ruthless to some, brilliant to others, he was a strategist, poet, and a master of politics. Cao Cao's path was never easy. Born to a modest family, he seized every opportunity, turning small victories into vast power. His armies were disciplined, his tactics legendary. At the Battle of Guandu, he faced overwhelming odds, yet through cunning and bold strategy, he crushed Yuan Shao, proving that intellect could outmatch numbers. But Cao Cao was not just a hero. He was feared, often called a tyrant. His ambition knew no bounds, his decisions harsh. Yet, even his enemies respected his mind, for he could see the threads of power where others saw chaos. By the end of his life, Cao Cao controlled the heart of northern China. He laid the foundation for the kingdom of Wei, a testament to a man who could bend destiny with wit and will. Cao Cao remains a symbol of ambition, cunning, and the fine line between hero and villain.
After her death, someone tried to erase her name chiseled from walls, her statue smashed. Her stepson Thutmose III, the warrior king, sought to wipe her from memory. They called her king, but she was a woman. In a world ruled by men and gods, one woman rose to take the throne of Egypt, not as queen, but as pharaoh. Her name was Hatshepsut. Born a royal daughter of Thutmose I, Hatshepsut was meant to support kings, not become one. Yet fate had other plans. When her husband, Thutmose II, died young, she became regent for his infant son. But soon, she took a step no woman had dared before, she crowned herself pharaoh, the living god of Egypt. To silence her critics, she adopted the full regalia of kings, the headdress, the kilt, even the false beard. In temples and monuments, she was carved with the body of a man, but her name told the truth, the foremost of noble women. Under her rule, Egypt flourished. She opened trade routes across the Red Sea to the mysterious land of Punt, filling Egypt with gold, incense, and exotic treasures. She built grand temples, including the magnificent Deir el-Bahari, a masterpiece carved into the cliffs of Thebes, a temple that still stands in her honor today. After her death, they tried to erase her name from history. Yet history remembered. For centuries her story was buried under sand and silence, until archaeologists brought her face back to light, the face of Egypt's first great queen to rule as pharaoh.
They say hate can destroy a man, but mine built an army. I was 9 years old when I stood before my father, Hamilcar Barca, the lion of Carthage, and swore an oath. My hand on the altar, my eyes fixed on the gods. I will never be a friend of Rome. I didn't understand politics then, only that Rome had humiliated my people, stripped us of lands, and forced my father to kneel. I would dedicate my life to ending them. Years passed. My father fell, my brother led, and then it was my turn. They called me young, reckless, but I saw opportunity. I gathered men from every corner of our broken empire, Libyans, Numidians, Iberians, warriors who had nothing left but vengeance. We set out from Spain, crossing rivers, mountains, and fear itself. And then came the Alps. Snow, death, and endless white. Men froze beside their elephants. Cliffs swallowed entire columns. But I would not turn back. Every step forward was a step closer to Rome. When we finally descended into Italy, the Romans laughed. They thought we were broken. They didn't know what was coming. Trebia, I broke them. At Lake Trasimene, I trapped them in the fog and drowned their legions. But at Cannae was my masterpiece. 50,000 Romans fell in a single day, their might crushed in a perfect circle of death. It was said the fields ran red for miles. For a moment Rome trembled. The Senate panicked. Mothers wailed. I stood victorious, knowing I had done what no man before me dared. I had brought Rome to its knees. But Rome does not die easily. They refused peace. They raised new armies, endless armies, bleeding us dry year after year. While my enemies multiplied, my allies faded. Carthage, my own city, grew jealous, afraid of my power. They left me stranded. I fought for 17 years on foreign soil, winning battles, losing time. And then came Zama. Scipio Africanus, young and clever, turned my tactics against me. My elephants panicked. My army shattered. Carthage fell again. And so Hannibal Barca, the terror of Rome, became a hunted man. He wandered from court to court, offering his wisdom to kings who feared Rome but never fought it. At last, when the Romans came for him, he chose his own end, swallowing poison rather than be paraded through their streets. He died far from home, but Rome never forgot him. Even centuries later, generals whispered his name with both awe and fear. Hannibal, the man who made the world tremble and nearly changed the fate of history itself.
The night was cold, the wind sharp, and Liu Bei felt like a man whose destiny had finally broken. His army was shattered, his brothers scattered, and the dream he'd carried since childhood, restoring the Han, was slipping away like water through his fingers. At Dangyang, he reached a lonely ferry crossing, a narrow pier, a dim lantern, and an old boatman waiting beside a worn wooden boat. Liu Bei let out a sigh heavy with defeat. "Old man, take me across." The ferryman studied him with a strange, searching gaze, but said nothing as Liu Bei stepped aboard. The boat drifted into the dark river, each ripple sounding like fate whispering in the distance. Halfway across, the old man finally spoke. "You look troubled, traveler." Liu Bei let out a bitter laugh. "I've lost battles, lost friends, lost everything I built. Maybe my fate is simply not to rise. Maybe I was foolish to think I could save the Han." The ferryman rested his oar and looked straight into him, not at the torn clothes or the mud on his boots, but at the fire still hidden beneath his exhaustion. "Young man, do you know what happens when a dragon crosses a river?" Liu Bei frowned, confused. The old man smiled, slow, certain, almost otherworldly. "Clouds gather. Winds rise. The world shifts. When a dragon leaves the shallows, it doesn't matter how weak it seems, nothing can stop its rise." He pointed his oar toward the far bank. "You are no fallen man. You are a dragon who has not yet ascended. Do not mistake a low moment for the end of your destiny." The words struck Liu Bei deeper than any enemy's blade. Something inside him tightened, not with fear, but with awakening. When they reached the far shore, Liu Bei turned to thank the boatman. But the old man and the fairy were already swallowed by the mist, as if they had never existed. Liu Bei straightened his back for the first time in days. That single sentence, "You are a dragon," stayed in his chest like a burning brand. It carried him through defeat, through battles, through loss, and finally into founding the kingdom of Shu. Because on that cold, lonely night, a broken man remembered who he truly was. Liu Bei, the dragon who would one day rise.